In this video, we want to highlight how the Breeze team at our product's design addressed a Code Life ventilator challenge to create a low-cost, simple, easy-to-use and easy-to-build ventilator to serve COVID patients requiring mechanical ventilation in a short time frame. We will highlight how our prototype is safe, easily manufacturable, and can deliver life-saving ventilation to COVID-19 patients. Our system is extremely modular, allowing easy assembly, disassembly, and sanitization. It consists of subsystems, each of which is composed of individual modules. Let's explore the technology in each of these subsystems and modules, beginning with the interface to the software and electronics subsystem. Our ventilator interface is a 7-inch touchscreen display connected to a Raspberry Pi Model 4B. Our open-source Electron program, which uses React.js, is displayed on the screen. First, a setup protocol is initiated. This protocol involves first setting up a two-way error-check serial communication channel with the heart of our electronics control, an Arduino. If this communication channel cannot be opened or is ever broken, errors will emit, both from the Arduino and from the Raspberry Pi interface. Once this channel has been established, the interface begins a setup procedure, which guides the operator through a step-by-step procedure for inputting patient information and running diagnostic tests to ensure the proper functioning of the ventilator. The user guide provides information on how to set mechanical ventilation parameters and alarms, and describes what measurements are available on the observation screen. We created this user guide with the intent of operating this ventilator in a pandemic context, where less experienced or naive users would benefit from this prompting. Once this setup procedure is complete, the interface indicates that the ventilator is entering standby mode, during which ventilation parameters can be adjusted on the diagnostics page. The parameters can be adjusted through incrementation with on-screen buttons. Recommended parameter values, vetted by academic ICU physicians with COVID patient experience, are displayed on the inputs, making reasonable values clear to inexperienced users. The recommendations are specialized for each patient based on the patient's body mass index, height, weight, and gender. We display the two values which ICU doctors tell us are the minimal standard values to be monitoring during pandemic context ventilation. These are tidal volume and respiratory rate. We omit complex observables that aren't simple to interpret for new users, like flow, pressure, and volume graphs. When navigating to the alarms page, the operator of the ventilator can set custom alarms for high inspiratory pressure, low expiratory pressure, and high and low minute volume. These alarms are in addition to the default alarms. All alarms, when triggered, have a visual notification displayed on screen, as well as an auditory signal delivered through USB speakers connected to the Raspberry Pi. The parameters passed by the interface are sent to the Arduino, where our open-source firmware uses them to control the various electronic components throughout the ventilator. An important thing to consider is how the Arduino and Pi work together. All critical functions of the ventilator are under control of the Arduino. Thus, the less stable Pi is no longer a critical component, since it is solely responsible for the user interface. In the unlikely event that the Pi crashes, an alarm will sound, and the Arduino will continue to ventilate the patient in the previously selected mode. The firmware running on the Arduino is structured as a state machine to control different hardware elements at proper intervals, ranging from 1 millisecond to 100 milliseconds. In addition, there is a failsafe in communication between the Pi and Arduino, which communicates at 100 millisecond intervals. A miscommunication interval indicates to either of the controllers that the other is not functioning properly and will trigger a system-wide alarm. The Arduino is mounted onto a custom shield, which handles all electronics connections, including battery management and power supplies. The printed circuit board, PCB, handles sensor connections and amplification when needed. Such a board ensures the reliability of electronic connections, making our system even more robust and easy to debug. Power management in our device respects medical standards. The entire enclosure has no exposed metal parts, which reduces the risk of shock. In addition, our isolated medical-grade power supply is wired with a clear isolation of mains and low-voltage circuitry. The Arduino Shield incorporates an emergency alarm circuit, which in the event of failure, triggers an alarm. The alarm can be powered by the internal power. Alternatively, in the case of a blown fuse or other failure, a small 9-volt backup battery can power the alarm. The PCB's design resulted from considering several edge case scenarios. Annotated explanations of the circuit can be found in this submission. The second subsystem to consider is gas intake with two sources, atmospheric air and regulated pressurized oxygen, or O2. Atmospheric intake is controlled by a butterfly valve, custom designed and 3D printed to be compatible with the servo. The Arduino operates this butterfly valve using the servo to regulate the intake of atmospheric air. The butterfly valve was specifically incorporated in the design to allow the device to run at high FiO2 concentrations, which require minimal atmospheric air intake into the system. Since the regulation of FiO2 is ensured by the oxygen needle valve, the butterfly valve is linearly mapped fully open to fully closed to the desired FiO2 percentage from 21% to 100%. The reliability of this servo control concerned us, so to mitigate risk of failure, the servo is powered down when not in use. As it's only adjusted when the user determines or changes the desired FiO2 concentration, it rarely actuates. In addition, its own power supply ensures that the current spikes it generates do not put the Pi and Arduino into brownout. Concurrently, the Arduino controls a needle valve on the O2 intake via a stepper motor. Stepper motors are inherently robust. This stepper is re-zeroed during each exhalation by measuring current against a mechanical end stop. The mechanical end stop in this case is the needle valve closing completely. We can thus reliably detect a closed valve, reducing the risk of accidental O2 leakage. The control is a simple PD loop using a diving oxygen sensor for feedback. One of our unresolved preoccupations is the oxygen sensor. Ours is not designed for medical applications. The current pandemic occupies respiratory healthcare staff and ventilator manufacturers whose advice we wish to solicit. Health Canada's device standard information is complex, and we were challenged in finding the additional documentation that would have allowed us to create a solution to this limitation. Although mechanical ventilators have a single oxygen sensing mechanism, we were concerned about the lack of built-in redundancy, making it very hard to detect sensor failure. We hope to have the opportunity to source a sensor that will meet our, and this competition's, rigorous standards. The oxygen and air are combined in a 3D printed mixing chamber, which doubles as a mount for both the oxygen and air intake, as well as the compressor housing and emergency check valve. The compressor is optimized for the flow and pressure required and is entirely 3D printable. For longevity, the impeller should be machined on a 3-axis CNC mill out of aluminum. This will significantly help with cooling, and it will go a long way to reduce noise and vibrations. The housing is single piece and therefore does not require any custom gaskets. However, it should be printed on an SLA 3D printer. In fact, all of the seals in the device are standard O-rings. The turbine blower is spun by a synchronous AC motor, or brushless DC motor with a variable frequency drive, also known as an electronic speed controller. The desired power level is computed by an Arduino, which uses a PID loop with 2 pressure sensors for redundancy. The PID control on the Arduino allows for pressure to be precisely controlled through the modification of power delivered to the motor. Thus, the ventilator delivers the desired pressure within a reasonable precision range, with a redundant sensor in case of failure. The output of this blower is run through a complex pipe, which combines the oxygen sensor, a mechanical failsafe valve, a barb for the emergency check valve, and barb to connect a pressured air line to the control side of the PEEP valve. The mechanical failsafe valve is an off-the-shelf blow-off valve, which prevents pressure buildup. This is an extra safety layer in the unlikely event that the compressor spins at power levels for a significant amount of time, and that this overload will result in blowing the fuse. The emergency check valve is also printed. It uses a Buna N rubber flap, which seals with unidirectional airflow and is pushed out of the way with air flowing in the opposite direction. Its purpose is to allow the patient to breathe in the event that a catastrophic failure of the impeller obstructs the airway. Next is an off-the-shelf medical-grade flow sensor. In the event of large-scale manufacturing, this sensor will be replaced with a custom hot wire mass airflow sensor. The flow sensor is used to measure tidal volume by integrating flow. It also serves as an alarm trigger for disconnected or obstructed tubing between the ventilator and the patient airway. The patient triggers the mechanical ventilator in pressure support mode using the flow sensor. In pressure control, the rate and inspiratory time proportion make it a time-cycled rather than patient-initiated mode, not requiring triggering. Inspiration causes a flow, and its threshold is set to initiate inspiration when the flow is detected at 1 liter per minute. In keeping with the literature describing this level is associated with the least asynchrony between the patient and the ventilator. In other words, the change in flow indicates that the patient is initiating a breath, indicating to the state machine on the Arduino to initiate a pressure support breath. This machine uses only flow for patient breath triggering. Ventilator models can integrate pressure and/or flow, but ventilators such as the Drager Avita or the Puritan Bennett have a single flow detection breath initiating feature. This flow sensor also serves to determine when to end inspiration. Expiratory flow is highest at the beginning of every breath. When this flow drops to below 25% of whatever maximal flow was generated by the patient on that particular breath, the flow-cycled pressure support mode is programmed to switch to the passive exhalation phase, meaning the ventilator pressure drops to whatever PEEP level was set. This brings us to the patient connection subsystem. First, the check valve is a critical component in the non-rebreathing functionality. This check valve, which is identical to the emergency check valve, is also 3D printed as one part with the filter housing. Along with the filter, the check valve provides infection protection for the impeller and housing, which are the most complex and most difficult to replace parts. On the clean side of the filter, a barb connects to the pressure sensors. This is the last clean part in the machine, as it is directly connected to the patient with minimal restriction. This guarantees pressure readings that are representative of those measured at the Y connector, without having to model flow restrictions. The filtered air then passes through standard medical tubing into a standard HME to control circuit humidity and temperature before entering the patient. We consider the next component, the exhaust, as the most novel part of the entire system. The filter enclosure is identical to the inhalations enclosure and is 3D printed. It seals against the filter end itself with a standard O-ring. It is connected to the PEEP valve below it. The PEEP valve is a 3D printed diaphragm pressure-controlled relief valve. It uses a thin Buna-N rubber diaphragm which has a pressure vessel connected to the compressor output on one side. When the compressor creates pressure, the diaphragm is sealed against a sealing surface, blocking off the exhaust. Thus, during inhalation, when pressure is equal on both sides of the valve, the check valve is open and the PEEP valve closed, forcing air into the patient's lungs. To ensure that this valve doesn't leak, there is a slight bias to the closed position, which is achieved by having the diaphragm mechanically stretched over the sealing surface. During exhalation, the check valve is closed. The compressor thus controls the pressure at the back of the PEEP valve, independently from the pressure present in the patient's airway. Since the pressure sensor is on the patient's side, the compressor is now used to create the desired resistance on the reverse side of the diaphragm to maintain PEEP pressure. Thus, the PEEP valve is opened and exhaled air is exhausted. With such a valve, our device replicates all commercial modern ventilator functions with only a fraction of the active components used in conventional ventilators. This completes the description of how each single inspiration and exhalation are processed. If power should fail, the built-in internal battery will maintain ventilator operation for 20 minutes with the ability to connect and hot swap any external 12-volt battery. The ventilator has a built-in battery management circuit based around a single MOSFET, which will charge and maintain batteries when it is plugged in. The device is also equipped to measure battery current draw, which, combined with battery voltage, results in an accurate and pragmatically useful estimate of battery life. In addition, the device has standard Buna-N O-rings to seal all of the high-pressure connections, as well as gaskets to seal the case, which allow the ventilator to be hosed down. All of the custom seals, such as the diaphragm for the PEEP valve, are designed with loose tolerances and can be easily made with a stencil and a pair of kitchen scissors. This concludes a summary of all of the functional components in our ventilator. Overall, this device combines 3 simple feedback sensors, oxygen, flow, and pressure, with 3 active components, servo, stepper, and blower, to achieve complex control through imaginative design and software with minimal off-the-shelf parts. As you have seen, our ventilator is modular, robust, precise, easily and cheaply manufacturable, and intuitive to use even for inexperienced operators. Our diverse Canadian team is excited to share our ventilator with the world and make an impact on the global COVID crisis.